The topic for today is one, that I think, like I pretty much say about a lot of topics these days, we're learning about it a lot as we go, today, especially in the Indian ecosystem, within the HR space, what we can do about it within the corporates. It's all very, very fresh and new for a lot of us right now. And the topic is eradicating bias, right? Everything from the identification to what actions can be taken and things like that. I think one big challenge that we've all faced, is that a lot of times these conversations haven't even happened. And that's why we felt that this was an important topic to sort of raise. And it is something that, we will continue to focus on to bring more such topics, to the conversation. Our two HR leaders today who have graciously accepted the invitation for the discussion are Harini Sreenivasan. She's someone you would have known for a very long time if you've been an All Things Talent member. She's been to our events, she's an active contributor to the magazine, has articles on our blog, and has always supported all our initiatives. She's a business transformation evangelist. She's currently the partner at Sempostyle Institute India. She's a design thinker, a neuroscience enthusiast, and a behavioral scientist. And while she may be currently into HR, she spent more than 2 decades of successful experiments, as she likes to call it, in the areas of leveraging people potential for business agility and excellence. Obviously, I mean, she's done keynotes, she's done TED Talks, and we're very happy to have you here, Harini. Thank you so much for joining us. Right. Up next, our second panelist is Mr. Atma Godara. He's the production HR generalist APAC at Netflix. He actually has a different story because he's an engineer turned human resource professional with a Bachelor of Engineering in Information Technology. And after that, he's done his master's from TIS as well, and he's demonstrated across industries, across different kinds of organizations, whether it's a startup or a conglomerate, including his current massive organization that we all know about. That he is someone who loves to work on several HR related issues, several problems. He has several specialities as well that he's worked on, whether it's business partnering, whether it's and I'm pretty sure he will bring his own flavor to the entire conversation because he's someone who's currently working at Netflix, right? Atma, thank you so much for joining us here, and we look forward to hearing insights from you, right? So now that I've sort of done the introductions and I've sort of told you guys who they are, I think it's the best way to sort of, understand them better is to listen to them directly rather than me continuing to butcher their introductions. So firstly, Harini, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to ask you one very rapid fire kickstart that we always do, at the start of every webinar is, one personal positive and one professional positive that has come your way post COVID-19 and the pandemic. I mean, of course, it has been a tough time for everyone, and obviously we're in a position of privilege where we can talk about this right now. But if I was to ask you, what was one personal positive and one professional positive that came your way through the pandemic? Harini, over to you.
Thank you very much, Prashant, for that wonderful introduction. It's always a pleasure for me to be doing anything in collaboration with Naukri Hiring Suite and anything that's got to do with All Things Talent. And I'm happy to be here again. It's an interesting question to start with, and I'll take the professional positives first. What always intrigued me in the olden days is that why is it that some businesses are not able to think of remote working or hybrid working? So they used to say it doesn't work in our industry. But suddenly when the pandemic happened, overnight, everybody made it possible and they went beyond every stretch of imagination to make it happen. So when I went back and asked these questions to people, how did you make it happen? They said, we trust that our people will work from wherever they are. So I think the biggest positive that the pandemic gave us in the professional world is that trust exists. It was somewhere dormant, but the pandemic has made it emerge, and which is actually going to go a very long way in building people-centric democratic organizations. The personal positive, I think, staying at home in a lockdown amidst the very rigid lockdowns in the beginning, for me, this was a very, very clear indicator of how do I differentiate between my needs and my wants. And now I'm on the path of only satisfying my needs and not chasing my wants. So I think somewhere at the age where I am right now is making a lot of sense, because I'm on my journey towards minimalism in whatever way I can. And I would credit the pandemic for giving me that positive.
Right, wonderful. I think that helps me sort of, that helps the attendees also understand you and your point of view much better. Atma, the same question to you, one personal positive, one professional positive that's come your way.
Sure, Prashant, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. And I really like the way Harini put the context of work from anywhere into the trust mode, right? Now, people they have trust with each other. Like majority of the organizations we have seen, where the employee relationship has become more beautiful, right? They are working from anywhere. People are working from all the locations. For me, honestly, there's the line between professional and personal is blurred now. I mean, after we got into the pandemic, and it is true for so many people. But if I have to pick up, say, two positive, for professional, I think again it goes more like working from anywhere. I think trust is a beautiful version of it. But as I was just talking with you, and initially when we were discussing that, I'm sitting on my rocking chair today and having this conversation. That essentially I don't have to work from one table and chair. Pretty much applicable to the office space also, but in offices, I mean, this is very weird also. I'm not very fond of working in a closed space with air conditioners, right? So you can open your window and work. And this is one professional stuff. And the personal side, I think it is more about, again, line is blurred. So for example, we are having this conversation. So learning has been now super accessible. And for this conversation, we don't have to travel to Delhi or Mumbai or Bangalore. We don't have to set up, we don't have to like book a hall and we have to set up a call and doing all the logistics things. We have just log in from our mobile phone or laptop and we are just here. So I have attended so many sessions, and this hit me last week when I got a call from a college in Pune, and they're like, we want to have the session sort of in person. They were having something. I'm like, can't we have it like through Zoom or Hangout? So I think this is one personal thing which has been there, and it will be there for a longer duration, even if we don't have a pandemic, which we won't have hopefully in next few months.
Great. I think so. Talking about there are no boundaries to learning now. So I think that's an amazing point, and I think everyone will agree to that as well. So great. I think fair points, and thank you so much to both panelists for sharing that. I think this is the right time to sort of involve our attendees as well. So I think we'll have the first poll coming up on the screens right now, which is of course on the topic today. Yes. So does your organization acknowledge the bias problem? I'm not asking if they found a solution, if you got initiatives, do they even acknowledge it, that it exists? That is my question. Let's get voting, everyone. Yes. So I think we'll give it another 3 seconds and then we'll sort of see the results. Right. So I think now let's see the result. Right. Right. Can everyone see the result? Right. So I think 67% say yes, they have acknowledged the bias problem, and 33% say no, that there is no conversation about it either, right? That is the point that we're trying to sort of showcase to everyone, that 67% actually think that they've acknowledged. So I think kudos to the 67% firstly, because at least those conversations are happening because they're important, right? To the 33%, hopefully post this webinar, I think there will be an opportunity for you to go back to the drawing board and work on something new, right? All right. Yes. So I have a question, which is, will the consolidated survey results be shared with us? Yes, I'm actually speaking out the results. So 67% said yes, 33% said no. So that is the result, Ashwini. And of course, we'll be doing more polls. I'll keep reciting them, but I'll also write them down here if you'd like. Right. All right. So I think now that we've sort of understood where the audience is coming from, I think the first question that I'd like to ask, sure. I mean, so Ashwini is asking for the email. Okay, sure. I mean, we'll send it across to you as well. Right. So my first question, I'll start with Harini for this. what's the most problematic bias according to you within the Indian ecosystem? Because we're trying to contextualize this conversation for us. I know there are several kind of biases that exist, some unconscious, some conscious. What, according to you, is the most problematic bias? Something that hinders the person, the organization. What would it be? First, Harini, you go, and then I'll come to you.
For me, what I observe is that I won't really say it's about any particular category or anything, but I think perception or stereotyping, which is the underlying cause of a bias, that is where the problem is. Now, let me give this to you with an example. Right now, I am mentoring and guiding a bunch of armed forces veterans to transition from the world of uniform to the corporate world. And believe it or not, their challenges are something which one can hardly imagine, because they say that the moment we come from the armed forces, the moment your resume has the armed forces or the uniform in it, there is a perception that they will make excellent security chiefs or admin chiefs. So they go by the military rank or the army rank, and they will offer them positions which are in the security function. It might be a general manager's position, but a general manager of administration or head of security or chief of staff or something like that. But very few or hardly any organization really looks down into what is it that they have done as their core domain in the armed forces. So the perception is based on the outlook, and it does not go deeper than that. And very interestingly, there are so many of them who are engineers, masters in engineering, and they have worked on extremely complex engineering stuff. They have worked on algorithms. They have worked on high technology. They have worked on supply chain. They're specialists in supply chain. And all of this, they have actually worked in crisis situations. So just imagine if we were to remove the perception of the uniform and look at their core abilities that they bring to the table. You don't look at how many years of corporate experience they have, because they might have 0 to 3 years at the most, because they're transitioning. If you don't look at how many years of corporate experience, but if you look at how many years of domain experience, if we start looking at the CVs, I think the stereotyping bias could be eliminated. And why I brought this example is that not only in this case, but any bias that I see, mostly the most predominant one that I see is that of a stereotyping, that people of a certain gender can't do this, people of a certain age can't do this, people of a certain age are not tech savvy, people coming from a particular region will not be able to communicate. Now, all these are perceptions. Now, you might be wondering, why am I bringing perceptions into it when we are talking of bias? Now, my study of neuroscience, the reason I went into neuroscience research is precisely this. What is it that is causing these biases? Because I was trying very hard to bring in bias neutralizers in the corporate world, and I was intrigued, and I realized that it starts with perceptions. Perceptions over a period of time becomes belief, and belief over a period of time becomes a bias. So, that is why I say that the most common problem is may not be the bias itself, but it is a perception which is so deeply ingrained that it translates into a bias. So whatever it may be, perception, the moment you pick up a name, the moment you read the address, the moment you read about the hometown, the moment you read what religion this person is, constantly your brain is forming stories around that based on the experiences you've had, based on whatever you have read, based on whatever you have watched, with all those influences, and the brain is coming up with beautiful stories which are actually creating those biases. So I think it's the perception is the problem, not really the bias.
Great. I think that sort of brings out a very wonderful point, and I think the bias that you spoke about, whether it is the veterans or whether it's someone talking in a language or someone moving to a new city, things like that, I think these biases do exist in all of us as well. And I think thank you so much for sharing that. I think you've given me some wonderful quotes from within that 2-minute answer as well. So thank you for that as well. Atma, I'm going to come to you next. What according to you is a crucial bias that you see wreaking havoc, that you see creating a lot of problems within the corporate space?
Sure. Thank you, Prashant. I think I really like Harini how she bifurcated the bias. It is the perception which translates into the belief, and from belief it goes to the bias what we have. So, and I was, sort of thinking about the definition. How do I define a bias? Because I remember last time when I was in college a few years back, we studied a lot about the bias, and probably I have to go back to the textbook to know the definition of the bias to break it down. So if I break it down into smaller parts, a bias is nothing but a preconceived notion of someone or something. It could be about an object, it could be about a person, basis religion, caste, economic status, background, where the person is coming from, what Harini has mentioned initially. And how do we develop that bias? It is based on some information which we already have, or we perceive to have, or we lack that information. So it could be both ways. We have some information, or probably we lack that information, right? Basically, it is a subjective way of thinking that originates from an individual's own perception or point of view. So what I am thinking, it is coming from that. So, and what happens because of these biases, it actually influence the way, or rather affect the way we think, behave, and perceive other people. So you see, the bias itself, the word has a negative connotation, and any kind of bias having at a workplace or out of work or in the social life is a bad thing to have. But even if I have to pick up one bias which I think is something which is doing the most harm at this point of time, and if I have to narrow down to the corporates what we are talking about, probably confirmation bias is something which is very, very harmful, because it affects a lot. It starts from the hiring, it affects during the entire employee lifecycle management, it affects during appraisal performance, during the exit also. That confirmation bias is nothing but we have the tendency to seek out information that supports something which you already have, which you already know. So it is again a subset of a cognitive bias. But I think confirmation bias is one bias which is the most harmful bias and affects the entire employee life cycle from start to the end when you work in any organization.
Great. I think so. Confirmation bias, I think that's something that actually I don't know anyone who doesn't sort of seek that, whether it is through the appraisals. And a lot of times, like you said, we're actually trying to work towards the confirmation of a belief that we have. And we're trying to sort of get there by hook or by crook. So, thank you so much. I think that's a wonderfully detailed answer from the both of you. And, that brings me to my next question, because, and I'll pose it to Harini here first. Harini, how do you identify, that one is biased in the approach? Now, for example, maybe I am biased. How do I know that I am biased, right? And apart from that, post that, I think one very important tool and test that we've spoken about with regards to biases is the psychometric testing and things like that. So what are your thoughts about, firstly, how do I identify the bias if it is within me, and what role does psychometric testing have in terms of bias eradication?
This is again a very, very interesting space. I've been an observer of people all my 2.5 decades of corporate life, and what I noticed is that when no questions asked when somebody is doing something, or when you're not getting into details of things, you're not challenging what that person says. These are all indicators of bias. Now, when I'm biased towards somebody, I refuse to even look at the flaws. I ignore the red flags. And that's very strong. I myself have done it. Very recently, I discovered that there were very strong red flags from somebody whom I was mentoring. And I was actually consciously ignoring, refusing to see it, even when people pointed out to me. So that was a very strong bias. And the bias was because I saw this individual like a mirror image of me. I saw myself or my younger self in that person over a period of time, and I could not see what was wrong. And this is very normal human nature. So I think the best way to observe is take a step back, introspect. When you're introspecting your own day or week, look back at those situations where you did not challenge anybody, you challenge a particular person repeatedly. If you're consistently not challenging someone, you're consistently not looking at somebody critically, you're consistently ignoring red flags from someone, consistently ignoring the flaws. Now, I'm emphasizing on the word consistently because that is where you realize that probably it could be a bias. Because, okay, sometimes in fatigue, I don't want to get into details, so I ignore, which is okay. But consistently, if I am showing a particular behavior with an individual, then most probably that's a bias. You don't need a complicated tool to test it. You can do that by self-introspection. Even in observation, when you're looking at people, when I had my managers reporting into me and then the teams below them, I used to look for these signals that where are those group dynamics playing? Are there very obvious choices as to where people go and sit next to whom? Now that could be a bias. Of course, comfort level, yes, but comfort level translates into a bias because it's very difficult to draw that line between a personal comfort and professionally to remain unbiased. So it's very interesting to notice those things, keep it at the back of your mind. So when you have to introduce those bias interrupters, they become very easy. Now, talking of psychometric tools, I have a bit of a contrarian view on the usage of psychometric tools because they were designed for a purpose. Psychometric tools, particularly, they help you understand different behavioral types in general. They, different personality traits, things like that. Each tool has a different purpose. But predominantly, if you use it without getting biased towards what you read in those reports, they are used mostly, they ought to be used for development. That is, if I am of a particular behavioral trait, let's take the simplest one. Let's take the DISC profile, okay? Predominantly, if my behavioral trait is high D, I'm a dominant personality, I'm a quick decision maker and all of that. If I'm in a role which needs me to not jump into a conclusion or decision quickly, psychometric tool result of my behavior explains to my manager how is it that I have to be developed, be suited to that role. Now, that is the purpose of a psychometric test. But when we do it for a team, and I've been a victim of that as well, again, it is natural tendency. When I do the psychometric test for a team, I say, oh, I'm high D, you're high D, so you and me are alike, right? That is where the bias starts. So the moment I see that I'm high D, you're high S, which means you will take time to take a decision, and I'm a quick decision maker, so I got to be careful of you. This is how biases start. So I would say that I wouldn't really recommend using psychometric tools to be indicators of biases, because sometimes when you do it and when you share the reports, because we say that as a team you ought to know because you need to adopt and adapt with each other. So share your reports, talk about what's your predominant style, let the team know, fine. But when you're talking about your behavioral style in a team, automatically biases are also getting formed. So I would say don't use psychometric tools for testing biases. I would rather say go by observations and very non-judgmental observations and become an observer of behavior. And that's a beautiful space to be in. I went into it by chance and I'm enjoying it all my life. And when you observe behavior, you notice a lot more biases. You notice a lot of the unconscious biases as well. So, observation is the best tool. Psychometric tools are good. They are indicators, but you have to be very, very careful. You have to keep on putting that word of caution when teams are using psychometric tools and when they're transparent about those tools.
Great. I think again, there you sort of given us the scientific aspect of it as well, and you've shared your own experience. I'm sure eventually also the other thing that could happen is if one person actually thinks that this person isn't, like within your own example where you spoke about the quick decision making, they might actually think that this person is not suited for a role that requires a lot of thinking and a lot of time and a lot of not jumping to conclusions. So I think that is something that can be used in reverse as well. So thank you so much for such a wonderfully detailed answer. I think that helps set up the context for my next question, and my next question is to Atma. I think while I'll ask this question, I'll also to just quickly sort of answer the query that has come my way from Ashwini. Looks like you are already biased because you are giving first chance each time to Harini. Actually, Ashwini, I have a layout of questions. So the next question is on gender stereotypes, and I'm going to pose it to Atma only. I'm not going to go to Harini for it. right? So that's how I'm going. So I mean, please do not feel offended by it. Yeah, yes, I know you're kidding, right? So my next question to to Atma is, how can we be conscious about gender stereotypes at the workplace? I mean, the reason why I ask you specifically about this is because in a lot of the questions that came in, I can recount at least 5 to 10 questions that were specifically about gender stereotypes in Indian workplaces. So obviously, it felt like this was the most talked about, and it is the most uh, problematic bias for women within the organization, and sometimes for men as well. So I mean, so what would you say? I mean, how do you think, as an individual, as an HR leader, as a business leader, how do we become more conscious about gender stereotypes?
Sure. I think, Prashant, this is one of the most problematic, and problematic in the sense that this is one of the most addressed bias what we talk about when we go to workplace. And the good thing is now more and more people are talking about gender stereotype. See, when we talk about gender stereotype, we say gender bias is nothing but the preference towards one gender over the other, over the another, resulting in unfair differences in the way the employees are treated by the employer, colleague, and team, everyone there. And the problem, or not the problem exactly, where it is coming from. Because see, again, as we were talking initially, that the boundary is really blurred. If I talk about, hey, in an office or in a professional setup, I will not be, biased towards any gender. But when I come back to my home, to my family, or I go and meet my friends in the society, I will be again have those biases. So technically, what we are doing, we are carrying it from our homes, from our society to the work. And the simple biases are, for example, probably say women are more benign, or say women are more creative, or say women are more ambitious. Like we talk about glass ceiling, we talk about everything. So it is there, and I think some of the things which are very very basic, which we should stop doing immediately, and these things everybody is doing till date, is like, when we have the first round of the interview, even if the recruiter is calling someone, they will never ask a man that, whether this, are you married or not, first of all, right? If you are married, where is your husband? Like, they will never ask a man. So when I give so many interviews, nobody asks me whether I'm married or not, right? And where is my wife? Second thing, are you planning to have a child? Because they see this, you are at this, what age spot you are. And I had this discussion, these debates with my team members. And, this is what we have to acknowledge, that, having a child is just part of the process and doesn't hamper your productivity, your efficiency in the workplace at all. It doesn't. And it is a joint effort, right? This is something which we have to address, and we should stop asking these questions immediately. This is the first thing. And again, this, when you talk about gender stereotyping, and, of course, it comes with the biases. And let's talk about, very, very simple thing. For example, when you go for the annual evaluations, for example, and which are again very subjective, though you have all the KRA and KPIs, but you always talk about, for example, say Tom is more comfortable and independent than, say, Kate in handling the client's concerns. And I already knew it, because I always knew that she would struggle with the project. When I hired her, this is the confirmation bias. I always think that the men are more suitable when it is a client need or it is a sales job. And probably I will have women probably for a desk job or for an HR job, what we say that, what that kind of thing which is there. So understanding and addressing this thing is very important, and we can take those small steps. I remember in one of my previous organization, we hired someone, and she was an excellent HR business partner for that role, evaluated and fantastic after like 50 people, and so on and so forth. After she was selected, after a week or so, she called the recruiter that, hey, I conceived a child, and, I thought I should let you know, because this is not fair, because if I join you, probably after a few weeks or say 9 months, I would be going on a maternity leave. I remember the hiring manager was like, no. Then the hiring manager like all work that, I'm all there for equal pay equity and gender gap, and I address everything. But how can we hire her? Because, it will. So I told him that, you are the hiring manager, you are taking this call that, you don't want to have her, but at least address the concern. Don't tell that you stand for equality, at least address that you have a problem with that. What Harini was mentioning, that let's please, the day you start accepting this, I have a problem with this, I have this bias that she won't be able to perform because she will go on mat leave, so on and so forth, unless you don't accept it, you will never work on it. So this is the one example where, I have seen it, and of course it has negative impacts. Both, there are so many studies which we can point out, right? Which talks about how pay equity differs and how the gender gap or gender stereotypes, impact the employee turnover or the organization performance for that fact.
Fantastic. I think the questions that you spoke about that are asked when the hiring is happening are the most basic, and they are the most prominent example, right? I think everyone knows that women are asked that question, and I don't know why they're asked that question anymore. I really don't get it. But yeah, so we've got a lot of questions coming in as well. I'm gonna sort of take one of them. Harini, would you like to take the question take a question that you like?
Yeah, this question, it's an extension to what I was saying. So I want to take this now, whether it's from an anonymous attendee, whether observation also can be a perception of anybody's behavior. It's a brilliant question, and I'm glad that it came out, and would have loved to know the person who asked this.
And you don't need to be anonymous to ask good questions. I think it's a wonderful question.
It's a wonderful question, because it reiterates the point I was making. As an observer, I also will have biases. I also can have perceptions, right? I might not notice someone having a bias towards someone else. Absolutely right. And how do you counter your own bias? And that's precisely why I said consistent behavior. So if I notice somebody 9 out of 10 times is not looking at someone's flaws, 9 out of 10 times is ignoring flaws, 9 out of 10 times is being extremely lenient, 9 out of 10 times is being extremely critical. The consistency is what that indicates the bias. Now, again, why I'm saying 9 out of 10 is, don't look at twice or thrice. That's not consistent. A statistically significant count, anything more than 7 in a very quick succession, is what is statistically significant. So anyone who is every week we have a weekly meeting. Okay, every week there's a meeting. Every weekly meeting, the manager is picking one individual and is being extremely critical. This happened over 10 weeks without exception. Now, this could be a bias. So watch out for that consistency. Now, if you feel that's a bias, if you have to really test yourself whether it's a perception or not, you have this indication. So watch out the dynamics between these two individuals in another context. Look for consistency there. So a lot of it happens when you observe behaviors. Why I'm saying, again, want to bring that contrarian view of psychometric test is, many a times, a lot of these tools, when you respond to those tools, when you're fresh and when you're in fatigue, it gives a very, very different kind of an output. So therefore, even those are not reliable, because there, your state of mind can influence your response. And therefore, consistency in observation is a fairly good disruptor of bias in your own perception. So a brilliant question. Would love to know the name of the person. So maybe you can let us know later.
Yeah. So I think so. I think I also have a lot of questions coming in. So there's a wonderful question from Dr. Ellen Vimuri. Pallavi's also asked a wonderful question. And Prasad's also shared a question. I'm going to, do all of these questions one by one. But before that, I think we have another poll lined up as well, because at this point, we'd like to understand, from you, what, where you stand in terms of conflict resolution. Can you see the poll on your screen at this point? Yes. So I think so there's a poll on your screen right now. You guys can. It's a very simple question. Have you been in conflict resolution situation regarding a stereotype bias at the workplace? At this point, we're not even asking you if it's a situation of you handling it directly. We're just saying, have you seen something? Have you been in that situation as a colleague, not as an HR necessarily, but as a colleague? Have you been there? Right. So I think 75% of you, and the number is still rising, right? So let me share the results for that as well. Right. So 77% of you are folks who believe that you've been in that situation. So that means obviously the biases are very real, right? Which sort of tells me that at least the fact that these conversations are happening are very important. So since you've been in those situations, you can also relate to what the panelists are sharing right now, whether it is their individual experiences, whether it is, a question asked in the interview. I'm sure. So Atma spoke about a question. I'm sure Harini was asked that question, at one of her previous organizations as well. She may have also asked that question at some point. So I'm saying all of these things are happening in and around us. At this point, I think one question that I was going to ask and a question that has sort of come up as well, and I'm going to pose it to both panelists, is around the management and leadership. All right, so Dr. Ellen Memory saying yes as victim is itself a biased opinion. Yes, got it. I mean, fair point. The doctor speaking like a proper doctor, I'm worried. I think Dr. Ellen Memory will sort of see, what we're about as well, right? Yes, so I think the question he's asking is, we have inclusivity during recruitment, we have inclusivity during town hall meet. We cannot sustain inclusivity when merit is looked at and while executing core and important tasks. Why don't we talk about bias both from top to bottom as well as bottom to top? I think this is something it's a really tricky thing to balance. Decision making happens at top level, but execution happens at the bottom up approach, right? Atma, I'm going to come to you for this. What do you think about the role of the management and the leadership when it comes to biases and the trainings that we do and everything? And how do we establish that balance between the senior most person in the company and the junior most person in the company?
Sure, Prashant. I think first, one thing I probably not strongly agree with, that biases happens at the bottom. I think these happens a lot at the top level also. Let's talk about a team of CXO where we have say one woman CXO and you have 5 say male CXOs. Then you will see lots of these things, because I have been a part of some of the C-suite meetings and I have worked with some of the leaders across the last few organizations. And I've seen that at a senior level, in fact, people are more biased, and at difficult stages of life. I'm talking about the gender bias because we have seen gender bias a lot and we have talked a lot about it already. Right from the beginning, when you enter as an engineer trainee or a management trainee, till the last point, even if you retire, you get bias, even not from, like, there are so many biases, right? There's a very one good example which came, I think, like even people are biased against successful entrepreneurs also. Indra Nooyi spoke once about her work, that for me my work comes first and then comes my children and third comes my spouse and my husband. She was sort of slut-shamed from so many people that how can you say your family comes second, your husband comes second? How can you talk about work? If if when Bill Gates says that I work 20 hours a day and I don't even I meet my wife say after 10 days, people are like, they applaud him. Wow, he's such an amazing, he made so much, he done so much. But it's the same thing when it is said by a women entrepreneur or a women CEO or a women leader. We are like, what is she doing? Her job is this. She should spend time with the kids. I mean, and it's very difficult for us to think the other way around. And when a male is saying same thing, we don't even think about those things. What you call that hey, why does this person is not spending time with the family or with the children for that matter. Having said that, when we talk about the top management, I think first and foremost is about accepting it that we all are biased. Historically, we have not been fair to say, be it women or be it Dalit. If we talk about caste, we don't talk about caste, right? Some of the ignored biases. Nobody speaks about the caste people who are lesser privileged one because of the caste, because of they come from certain section of the society. Or let's talk about a very basic, we all, so when we work in the Indian ecosystem, we all will assume that everybody would be speaking fluent English. We don't even address those people who has never studied English till their undergrad or postgrad for that matter. And they are now working and they are struggling. We don't even address people who are say introvert. They are people who are more sociable. And when it comes to your team outing or your appraisals and everything, we don't address those issues. So having said that, I think top management somewhere can start addressing these things in your town halls, in your all hands, that hey, let's talk about these things. Let's be more inclusive when it comes to all these kind of biases. I think communication is the key that should come from the top management.
Right. So I think, and Harini, if I was to pose the same question to you from the opposite angle, because he's saying that communication is the key from the top angle. The senior folks have to come out, communicate in a language that's relatable to everyone from top to bottom so that they understand it as well, right? What would you say? I mean, how do we ensure that there's not a massive disparity from the top to bottom in terms of the thought process and bias removal?
I think leading by example is the best way to communicate top down. Okay, so I have been through this experience of very strong gender bias at the CXO level. It's a personal experience, and it amused me a lot because in town halls we talk of an organization. I mean, we say that our organization is embracing D&I. We say that we believe in interrupting bias, and in the morning CXO huddle, there is me, CHRO, and four other male CXOs. It was very evident, and I personally went through it. So the point is, if we lead by example from the top, if we are able to consciously acknowledge our own biases and we are able to work on it and demonstrate, that's one of the best ways to communicate down the line. And to address Dr. Vemuri's question, and he being a very good friend of mine, I want to bring in that point that he brought a very beautiful point about top down and bottom up. So he says decision making happens at the top, so bias is influencing some decisions, but why not at the bottom, at the execution level? And he has a point, because at the execution level, if we are able to exercise bias interrupters, decision makers are actually being fed with information from the bottom. So it has to happen both ways. Lesser biased or towards unbiased decisions at the top can happen when we are able to feed them with lesser biased or unbiased information from the bottom. So it goes hand in hand. But communicating, to extend to what Atma is saying, to communicate to people that we are conscious of bias and we believe in interrupting biases is purely leading by example. There cannot be a better way than that.
Great. I think again, so we're trying to capture as much of the gamut as possible. I hope the attendees do realize that this is such a massive ocean of conversation that we may not be able to capture everything. And which is why I'm actually going to take Pallavi's question next. Pallavi's asked a very interesting question, because this is about action. Like, her question talks about, and our topic today is, as you can see behind me, it's identify and act. So in terms of action, and I'm looking for some best practices from the panelists now, within this. My question is, and in fact, Pallavi's question is personalities and, will life change as we grow? I have seen people, know it and they are still doing it in any case, and they're carrying on with it. It is about knowing it and still not acting on it. How do we take any action against these people? And, what are your thoughts on rectifying this through the organization? And I'm going to ask Atma about this question first. Atma, how do we sort of, when it's been identified that there is a bias at play and someone has, how do you have that conversation with the person who's not rectifying this behavior?
Sure. Prashant, in this case, I think, first of all, you can't have, say, a policy framework, do's and don'ts and talking points in hiring. That can't be done. That, you can't go and ask people, what is your marital status, or what are you future plans for having kids? See, this can't be done. I think the more important thing which should be done, and which I have seen people doing it and it is getting successful. First of all, we should understand that there's no shortcut. It will take, I don't know, months, years, and decades to take that smaller plunge to realize for all of us that how do we eradicate the biases? So first thing is, like, what we do here, sensitization. And how do we sensitize people? Let more people, let people be more open about their discrimination, what they faced. Say, let's pick up again, gender is one topic we can pick up. Let both men and women talk about the biases they face because of the gender stereotypes. If you want to pick up, say, caste, let's religion is a good example. If you want to talk about allyship, let people from different religions speak about it. Let's talk about the caste for that matter. Let people talk from the lesser privileged, what struggle they faced. When people are talking about their struggles, they open up themselves with their colleagues and they become more vulnerable. And as if I'm the one who's more privileged, who was aware of the biases, but I wasn't acting so far. But when I understand the struggle of my colleague, probably we are working in the same space, same level, doing same sort of work. But when I see the struggle where the person is coming from, where I'm coming from, it makes me more sensitive towards, the next act which I'm going to do. again, this act could be in terms of hiring, appraisal, or interaction for that matter. So I think again, letting people speak about it and more interaction, and be vulnerable with each other by sharing your own thoughts. And of course, how do I share about my struggle and my vulnerability if I have a safer space to talk about these things? So creating that safe space is very important to have these conversations. Unless you don't have this conversation, and very specific, very personalized, very focused, having probably a seminar or a webinar with some activists won't help. Letting your employees talk about their struggles and their dreams and their achievements will only help us getting to know more about it, and then I will be acting a bit in my next step when I go and hire, or whatever I do in my next, say, stint or phase, for that matter.
Fantastic. I think providing a platform for that communication, ensuring that they feel encouraged to share their own story as much as possible. I think that great. Thank you so much, Atma, for that answer. I can't believe that I haven't had the time to take any of my own questions, because the questions are piling in from the audience. But I think it's great. I'm going to take a question that has come in from Prasad Barakala, and I'm going to pose it to Harini, because it's an interesting question on a bias that exists in every organization, and it's not necessarily something that we even try to deal with. Prasad asked, there is always a bias between performers and non-performers in the organization. How do we keep the motivation up for the non-performers to perform with no bias in treating them? Harini, I'm going to ask you this question.
Again, another lovely question, a subject very close to my heart, which is performance management. So recency bias is what is the culprit when it comes to bias in performance. Okay, so we start labeling people once they have either performed very well or they have performed poorly. The people in the middle somehow escape everything. Okay, the problem is only with the extreme. So someone has been an excellent performer in the first year, we assume that this person is an excellent performer, and once that perception is formed, it becomes a belief, becomes a bias, and we refuse to see the flaws. And similarly with the non-performer, we believe there's a perception that this guy cannot perform, and then it becomes a bias eventually. Now, how do we counter that is start taking non-judgmental views, especially when it comes to performance, without getting influenced with the previous year's performance. So what I used to do as one of the practices to counter this bias in an organization was, we used to have historical ratings, okay, but when we would do the normalization or the group performance moderation, I used to deliberately hide the historical ratings. I said, this year's ratings, or whatever is going to be your decision, you'll not look at it. Okay, we will look at it only when we have to look at a pattern or a trend. This year's, you're going to look at whatever information or data that you want for this particular year or for the particular quarter or the period, whatever, we'll provide you that, and let the past not influence you. So deliberately hide it. Do not give visibility of that information. Now, that's when it comes to a performance review with data and all that. You can hide, lock the columns and do all of that. But on an ongoing, like I was talking about meetings, when somebody is constantly nitpicking on an individual who is once a non-performer, I think the other people who are conscious and observing, they should be in a position to point out that bias. If not in an open room, they should be able to point out at least in confidence. Now here I'm bringing the concept of psychological safety that Atma mentioned. If as a manager, I've given enough psychological safety, I've set up psychological safety for my team members, and I've told them that you be my accountability partner and you'd see me getting biased, and come and point out to me that I am unnecessarily nitpicking on someone, and that could be my perception or bias about that person's non-performance. So setting up accountability partners mutually, building psychological safety, being vulnerable, dropping those guards are biggest helps when it comes to acknowledging bias and working towards them. So even if you're a manager, you can have an accountability partner with somebody in your team saying that I trust your judgment. So the moment you see me getting biased towards a performer or a non-performer, please point out to me or keep me honest on that. I think that works very well.
Brilliant. I think again, so there's a recency bias at play there. Apart from that, having an accountability partner, I think that's something that's really fresh. And honestly, that has no, like an infusion of funds into, or it doesn't require a budget. Get someone to be your accountability partner and someone who can actually keep track of what you are doing as well. Someone you trust in terms of their judgment as well. So I think that's a great best practice to follow as well. We've actually, wow, so it's actually 5:53, and what I will do is I will sort of ask both panelists at this point, and starting with you, Atma, what is one great best practice, that you think would work in most ecosystems? It could be about a specific bias, it could be about an overall sensitivity training aspect. What is one best practice that you would recommend to everyone out there for eradication of biases?
See, there are two ways to it. I think somebody has commented also in the chat that what is long-term way to eradicate bias and what is a short-term one. So I think long-term is, of course, we have spoken a lot about it. How do you sensitize people? How do you create that safe space to talk about it, which will help other employees to learn about it. They can also understand that what privileges they have, and how can they address and understand those biases which they had because of the privilege. Shortcut, which I have seen at some of the places, I think that those also work. I don't know how they will work in a individual setups in your organization. They might or might not work. Is one place what I've seen that they have, when they were hiring people, the hiring team was sort of given an instruction that with the hiring manager, you will not, at least in the screening part, you will not share the name of the person. So that helps a lot. It helps you cutting on the gender bias. It helps you cutting on the religious bias, caste bias. If you just remove the name from the CV, and it helps a lot, at least in the beginning, when you don't have the face-to-face interview and all those things. So I think this is one short-term we can probably, which I have seen and I really appreciated it. And it worked for that organization, what I'm talking about in past.
Fantastic. I think blind screening would be great. Harini, your favorite best practice?
Yeah, I'll give you two best practices. Similar to what Atma said, when it comes to performance management, one best practice is hide all the names so that you don't start looking at them relatively when you're not meant to be looking at them relatively, because that's where bias creeps in. That's one practice. Hide all the names when you're doing the normalization or moderation, because you're going by who's being more lenient and who's not lenient. Another best practice is, now I'm talking it from an organizational policies and procedures perspective. Whatever policies the HR department writes, or maintains, or procedures or guidelines, whatever, keep them as neutral as possible. Not just gender neutral, but neutral in all respects. Let hiring policies talk about competencies. Let performance promotion policies talk about capabilities and potential. And make all these things as measurable as possible. So even your attendance policy, for that matter, keep it as neutral as possible. The moment you start putting a particular time in, time out, and making it rigid, there is always a section of people who might find it difficult to make it. And then that becomes a perception, it becomes a stereotype. Office starts, you have to punch in at 8, women can't make it, so we will not hire women. You don't write it anywhere, but that happens. It becomes a perception. Women won't apply because your office timing says start at 8. People have their own perceptions also. So any policy that you may, keep them simple so that they sound very neutral. Nowhere statutorily it says policies have to be in legal language. We are all making that mistake. Make policies which are not more than 2 lines. Netflix's policy, spend it as if it were your own money. One of the policies which I made, saying that you're accountable for professionalism in this organization, so you just decide your dress code. As simple as it. So biases cannot creep in, because everyone will start doing what he or she is comfortable in, and accountability towards the organization is also highest. So I think keeping policies simple and neutral is one of the best practices for bias neutralization.
Fantastic. I think over the last 57 minutes or so, we've had everyone constantly glued to their screen. I'm sure you are taking notes. I can see Atma has been taking notes as well. So I think that's really appreciated. And, how do I summarize this? So we've spoken about all kinds of biases. We've spoken about stereotypes that exist. We've discussed a lot of best practices as well. And apart from that, I think one thing that I would like to tell everyone is that one size doesn't fit all. So obviously, the solutions may not immediately be implementable within your own ecosystem, but I'm sure you can figure out a customization and an opportunity within that to grasp it. I mean, a lot of these best practices weren't exactly dependent on big budgets, right? They were dependent on just utilizing, the agility of the organization and the people in and around you. So I think great. I think thank you so much to both the panelists. Thank you so much to all the attendees who've attended and who've been with us throughout the entire hour, because I haven't seen anyone drop out. The number's only risen. So thank you so much for that. And most importantly, these questions that have come in from the attendees, you've actually, for the first time I don't know how many events and webinars, I haven't even looked at my own questions. So it's been all you and your questions. And thank you so much to all the attendees, to the panelists for doing this with us. I mean, whoever's on their way out, please do, fill in the feedback form. And so that we can continue to be better at what we do. And to both the panelists, thank you so much, Harini. Thank you so much, Atma. And I really wish that we continue to engage over these platforms. To everyone else, I mean, what a wonderful hour. And with that, we bring to an end the entire hour. Thank you to everyone, like I said. And like I said, please do fill the feedback form. Once again, massive thanks to everyone. We hope you, your families, friends are all safe and out. Continue to take the necessary precautions. Please do continue to drink water. Please ensure you guys get vaccinated. And I think we'll see you next time, right? Thank you so much. Please stay safe.
Thank you very much. It was great to learn from Harini as an expert in this field, and lovely questions and thoughts. Thank you, Prashant, for articulating and putting it very full.
Thank you, Atma. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much, Prashant. As always, a pleasure. And Atma, it was wonderful meeting you, and hope to see you soon in person sometime.
Yes, sure,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Into the Q&A box. The topic for today is one, that I think, like I pretty much say about a lot of topics these days, we're learning about it a lot as we go, today, especially in the Indian ecosystem, within the HR space, what we can do about it within the corporates. It's all very, very fresh and new for a lot of us right now. And the topic is eradicating bias, right? Everything from the identification to what actions can be taken and things like that. I think one big challenge that we've all faced, is that a lot of times these conversations haven't even happened. And that's why we felt that this was an important topic to sort of raise. And it is something that, we will continue to focus on to bring more such topics, to the conversation. Our two HR leaders today who have graciously accepted the invitation for the discussion are Harini Sreenivasan. She's someone you would have known for a very long time if you've been an All Things Talent member. She's been to our events. She's an active contributor to the magazine, has articles on our blog, and has always supported all our initiatives. She's a business transformation evangelist. She's currently the partner at Semco Institute India. She's a design thinker, a neuroscience enthusiast, and a behavioral scientist. And while she may be currently into HR, she spent more than 2 decades of successful experiments, as she likes to call it, in the areas of leveraging people potential for business agility and excellence. Obviously, I mean, she's done keynotes, she's done TED Talks, and we're very happy to have you here, Harini. Thank you so much for joining us. Right. Up next, our second panelist is Mr. Atma Godara. He's the production HR generalist APAC at Netflix. He actually has a different story because he's an engineer turned human resource professional with a Bachelor of Engineering in Information Technology. And after that, he's done his master's from TIS as well, and he's demonstrated across industries, across different kinds of organizations, whether it's a startup or a conglomerate, including his current massive organization that we all know about. That he is someone who loves to work on several HR related issues, several problems. He has several specialities as well that he's worked on, whether it's business partnering, whether it's and I'm pretty sure he will bring his own flavor to the entire conversation, because he's someone who's currently working at Netflix, right? Atma, thank you so much for joining us here, and we look forward to hearing insights from you.